The Vurelians arrived on Earth without warning, their massive ships descending from the sky like silent predators. Humanity had braced for war, but instead, the aliens extended a tentative hand of diplomacy. Though powerful, the Vurelians were not invincible, and Earth offered something they desired: knowledge, resources, and an alliance that could change the course of history. Among the first assigned to interact with humans was Riven, a Vurelian diplomat and warrior, chosen for her keen instincts and unshakable resolve. She had always viewed humans with skepticism. They were weaker, slower, and lacked natural weapons: no claws, no fangs, no hardened scales. By all logic, they should have been an insignificant species, yet they thrived in a way that baffled her people. Her assignment led her deep into the dense Amazon rainforest, where she was tasked with observing human conservation efforts. That was where she first encountered Eris. He wasn't a soldier or a politician. He was something far more unusual: a wildlife researcher, studying Earth's predators and their ecosystems. Riven had never understood the human fascination with nature beyond survival. Her own kind respected strength, but they did not bond with creatures as humans did. At first, she kept her distance, silently observing as Eris moved through the jungle with practiced ease. He spoke softly to the creatures he encountered, even the most dangerous ones. But nothing could have prepared her for what she witnessed one fateful evening. The jungle was alive with the sounds of the night when Riven stumbled upon a clearing, her golden eyes narrowing as she spotted movement ahead. She expected to see Eris working, perhaps collecting data on some lesser predator. Instead, she found him standing mere inches away from death itself. The Umberfang. Her muscles tensed instinctively. The Umberfang was no ordinary beast. It was an apex predator unlike anything else on Earth, a perfect killing machine. Its massive body was covered in sleek, void-black scales that absorbed the moonlight, its burning amber eyes locked onto the human standing before it. Claws as long as daggers flexed against the ground, each movement precise, calculated. And yet, the beast was calm. Riven watched, stunned, as Eris reached out and placed a hand on the creature's massive head. Instead of striking, the Umberfang closed its eyes, pressing into his touch with a deep, rumbling sound. Purr. Disbelief rooted her in place. You tamed our apex predator?" She finally burst out, unable to contain herself. Eris turned, his expression unreadable, as if what she was witnessing was the most natural thing in the world. "Tamed? No. Befriended? Yes." The Umberfang nuzzled him, its massive form completely at ease in his presence. It should have been impossible. The Vurelians had studied this creature extensively, even attempted to control it. Every attempt had ended in bloodshed. The Umberfang bowed to no one. Yet here it was, standing beside a human like a trusted companion. Riven took a slow, measured step forward, her instincts screaming at her that this was wrong. "How?" she demanded. "That creature knows no master." Eris chuckled, his fingers brushing gently against the Umberfang's thick mane. "Respect, understanding, and trust." She clenched her jaw, struggling to process what she was seeing. Vurelians commanded beasts through dominance, through displays of strength. But humans? They formed bonds. They created something far more complex than control. Riven had always believed humans were fragile, insignificant in the grand scale of the universe. Now, watching this impossible bond unfold before her eyes, she realized she had been wrong. The days that followed were filled with an uneasy curiosity. Riven, who had always prided herself on her ability to understand the natural order of things, found herself deeply unsettled by the sight of a human, of all creatures, walking alongside one of the deadliest beasts her people had ever encountered. It went against every instinct, every law of survival she had ever known. She kept her distance at first, watching from the shadows as Eris moved through the jungle, the Umberfang following him like a silent shadow. There was no leash, no force keeping it at his side. It simply chose to stay. That, more than anything, disturbed her. She had seen beasts obey out of fear, out of conditioned response, but never like this. Never because they wanted to. One evening, As the sky darkened to deep indigo and the jungle settled into its nocturnal rhythm, she finally stepped forward. You do not command it. You do not cage it. And yet it remains by your side, she said, voice carefully controlled. Why? Eris glanced at her, a knowing glint in his eyes. Because I don't see it as something to be controlled. He ran his hand along the Umberfang's thick fur, and the beast let out a low, contented rumble. Trust isn't about power. It's about understanding. Riven frowned. Understanding does not change instinct. That creature is a predator. Its nature is to kill. And yet it chooses not to, he countered easily. Because I respect what it is. I don't try to make it something it's not. She stared at him, golden eyes narrowing. Vurelians have studied this species for decades. We have seen it rip apart creatures far stronger than humans, break through restraints that should have been impossible to escape. Even our strongest warriors have fallen to its claws. Her voice lowered, edged with something close to frustration. You should be dead. Eris only smiled, as if the idea amused him. Maybe, but I'm not. That irritated her. He was too calm, too sure. It made no sense. The Umberfang let out a long breath, its massive body shifting as it settled beside Eris, curling its tail around its paws like an oversized feline. The sight was nothing short of surreal. A creature that should have torn him apart instead treated him like a packmate. Riven crouched across from him, studying the way his fingers moved against the creature's fur, the subtle way his breathing aligned with its own. You do not fear it, she observed. Eris shook his head. No. Fear breaks trust. It makes you unpredictable. Fear is survival, she countered. It is what keeps the weak from being consumed by the strong. He tilted his head slightly, studying her. Do you think humans are weak? Riven hesitated. You are softer, slower, without natural weapons. She met his gaze, searching for offense, but found none. By all logic, you should have perished long ago. And yet, here we are. He gestured around them, a quiet challenge in his expression. So tell me, if we are weak, why do we survive? She had no answer. For as long as she could remember, she had believed strength was the ultimate factor in survival. The Vurelian people were warriors first, their entire culture built upon the idea that only the strong endured. But humans, they did not dominate through brute force alone. They adapted. They formed alliances not just with each other, but with the world around them. That was what unsettled her most. The realization that perhaps strength was not the only path to power. The night stretched on, the sounds of the jungle humming around them. Riven found herself watching Eris more than she intended, noting the way his body moved with a quiet, practiced grace. He was not weak, not truly. His strength was different, subtle, patient, a predator of a different kind. She had never considered humans attractive before. Their features were too soft, their frames too unarmored. But something about the confidence in his eyes, the ease in which he met the world without fear, made her stomach tighten in a way she did not understand. The Umberfang suddenly lifted its head, ears twitching, and a second later, Riven heard it too, the rustling of movement nearby. Not human, not Vurelian, something else. Eris immediately reached for the small blade at his belt, though he made no sudden moves. The Umberfang's body tensed, eyes narrowing as it let out a deep, warning growl. Riven rose to her feet, her own claws flexing in anticipation. We are not alone, she murmured. From the shadows, a group of figures emerged, hunters, their weapons glinting in the moonlight. Not human, not Vurelian, poachers. They were known across the galaxy, trading in rare and dangerous creatures, selling them to the highest bidder. And from the looks of it, they had been tracking the Umberfang. Eris stiffened beside her. You don't want to do this, he called out, voice steady but firm. The lead poacher, a tall, wiry figure with reptilian features, sneered. That beast is worth more than you can imagine, human. His eyes flicked to Riven, and his smirk widened. And look at that, a Vurelian keeping company with prey. Interesting. Riven's eyes darkened. You will not touch it. The poacher chuckled. Oh? And what are you going to do about it? In response, the Umberfang let out a deep, earth-shaking snarl, stepping closer to Eris. Its presence alone should have sent the hunters running, but their weapons were already raised, energy nets primed to fire. Riven knew this wouldn't end peacefully. The moment the first net launched, she moved. Everything became a blur. Her claws tore through the nearest poacher's armor. Eris ducked and rolled, slashing at another's leg. The Umberfang struck like a living shadow, its massive body moving with terrifying speed as it ripped through the would-be captors. But there were too many. Riven saw the moment Eris was cornered, a net snapping around him before he could react. She lunged, but a second hunter caught her in a stun field, electricity searing through her body. The Umberfang roared in fury, but even it could not fight against the numbers. She watched helplessly as Eris was pulled to his knees, struggling against the restraints. The lead poacher crouched beside him, grinning. Brave, he mused, tilting his head. But foolish. Riven's vision blurred, rage burning in her veins. She had miscalculated. They had been reckless. And now, a sudden, ear-splitting howl cut through the air. It was not the sound of pain. It was a call. And the jungle answered. From the darkness, shadows moved. More Umberfangs. Dozens of them, their eyes burning like molten gold. Their movements fluid as smoke. The poachers froze. And then, all at once, the predators struck. Chaos erupted. The hunters screamed, their weapons firing wildly. But it was useless. The creatures were too fast, too coordinated. They overwhelmed the poachers in seconds, tearing through their ranks with merciless precision. Riven struggled to her feet, her body aching from the stun field, but she ignored the pain. She staggered toward Eris, clawing at the net that bound him. Are you hurt? She demanded, her voice sharper than she intended. He looked up at her, his expression unreadable. Then, despite everything, he grinned. You were worried about me. She scowled, heat rising in her face. Foolish human, she muttered, but her hands trembled as she freed him. The Umberfangs circled them protectively, the last remnants of the poachers vanishing beneath their claws. As silence settled over the jungle, Riven realized something else. The beasts had not come for her. They had come because Eris called them. And for the first time, she truly understood. This human had not just befriended one apex predator. He had earned the loyalty of an entire species. The jungle was silent in the aftermath, broken only by the heavy breaths of the remaining Umberfangs. Their golden eyes gleamed in the moonlight, their dark bodies shifting like living shadows among the trees. Riven watched them warily, her muscles still tense from the battle. The poachers had been foolish to believe they could claim such creatures. But what unsettled her most wasn't their demise. It was the way these predators had answered Eris's call. The Umberfang beside him nudged its massive head against his shoulder, and he reached up, brushing his fingers through its thick fur without hesitation. The others watched, some pacing restlessly, others still, their powerful forms barely visible in the shifting darkness. Riven swallowed down the strange tightness in her throat. You summoned them, she said, her voice quieter than she intended. Eris exhaled, his fingers absently stroking the beast's fur. I didn't know if they would come, but they did. He nodded. Because they trust me. The simplicity of his answer only deepened the questions swirling in her mind. The Aurelians had spent years trying to subdue these creatures, failing time and time again. And yet, Eris, one human, had done what entire war councils and scientific teams could not. She wasn't sure if it terrified or fascinated her. The Umberfangs began to move, some melting back into the jungle, their presence a mere ripple in the undergrowth. The one beside Eris lingered, brushing against him before finally retreating into the night. The clearing felt empty without them. Riven turned to Eris, folding her arms. You are more dangerous than you appear. He smirked, wiping the sweat from his brow. Because I made friends with a few big cats? Her jaw tightened. Because you defy nature's order. Eris tilted his head, studying her in that way that made her uneasy. Maybe nature's order isn't what you think it is. She had no response to that. Instead, she turned sharply on her heel. Come. We need to leave before more trouble finds us. They traveled through the jungle in silence. Riven kept to the trees, her movements fluid and precise, while Eris navigated the ground below with an ease that still surprised her. He was not like most humans she had encountered. He did not stumble blindly through nature, nor did he seem to fight against it. He moved with it, reading its language in a way even she struggled to understand. Eventually, they reached the river's edge, where a small human research station had been set up among the towering trees. The glow of artificial lights cast shadows over the water, reflecting off the sleek surfaces of drones and scanning equipment. Eris stepped forward, but Riven hesitated. She had avoided the human outpost for a reason. "This is your domain," she murmured, her gaze flicking over the strange structures. He glanced back at her. "You've been avoiding it?" She huffed. "Humans talk too much." He chuckled. "You say that like it's a bad thing." She only narrowed her eyes. Still, she followed him inside. The station was small but efficient. Metal walls lined with research consoles, holoscreens flickering with data. The scent of synthetic materials mixed with the earthy aroma of jungle air. Eris moved to a console, pulling up files on the poachers they had encountered. "They've been trying to capture umberfangs for years. Someone's paying a lot for them." Riven leaned against the wall, her arms crossed. "Fools. No amount of credits will buy them obedience." "Yeah, well, greed makes people stupid." She studied his expression. He was tired, she realized, though he hid it well. The battle had taken more out of him than he let on. Against her better judgment, she took a step closer. "You should rest." Eris arched a brow. "Worried about me again?" She scowled, ignoring the warmth creeping up her neck. "You are of no use to me, dead human." "Aha!" He smirked but didn't argue, rubbing the back of his neck. "I'll rest if you do too." Riven blinked. "I do not require." Yeah. Vurelians are stronger. Vurelians do not tire easily." He mimicked playfully. "Doesn't change the fact that you got hit with a stun field earlier." She bristled. "It was a minor inconvenience." "A painful one," he countered. She huffed but said nothing. He was insufferable. Yet, when he settled onto one of the station's makeshift cots, she found herself hesitating. For a moment, she considered leaving, retreating back into the comfort of the jungle. Instead, she sat across from him, watching as he closed his eyes. Silence stretched between them. The hum of the station, the distant sounds of the jungle. It all blended into a quiet rhythm. Riven should not have felt at ease. And yet she did. Her gaze drifted over Eris's features, the soft rise and fall of his chest, the faint bruises from the fight. Something about him unsettled her. Not in the way a predator did. Not in the way an enemy would. No, this was something different, and that was far more dangerous. The following days passed in a strange, unspoken understanding between them. Riven found herself lingering around the human research station longer than she intended. She told herself it was strategic, learning more about Eris, about the way he moved through the world, about the bizarre connections humans formed with creatures that should have torn them apart. And yet, if that were true, why did she catch herself watching him in moments of stillness? Why did she listen when he spoke, even when his words weren't about war or survival? She was beginning to hate the answers. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, staining the sky in hues of violet and crimson, she found Eris at the edge of the jungle. He sat beside the umberfang, his fingers idly tracing patterns through its thick fur. The creature rumbled, half asleep, content beneath his touch. Riven stopped a few paces away, arms crossed. "It still does not make sense." Eris didn't look up. "What doesn't?" "You." Her golden eyes narrowed. "This." She gestured toward the massive beast beside him. "By all logic, you should be dead." He smirked, finally meeting her gaze. "But I'm not." That only irritated her further. "You mock me, human." "Not at all." He tilted his head, studying her with that same quiet intensity that had begun to unravel her carefully held beliefs. You just don't like answers that don't fit into the way you see the world. She stiffened. The world has rules. Does it? His voice was soft, but there was something dangerous beneath it. Or do you just believe that because it's the way your people have always done things? Riven clenched her jaw. I have fought my entire life to understand the natural order. I have seen strength define survival. I have seen the weak consumed. And yet, he murmured, you are standing here, speaking to a human who has not only survived, but thrived. She hated that he was right. Silence stretched between them, the jungle humming with the sounds of the night. Eris leaned back, gazing at the sky. I used to think like you in a way, he admitted. That nature had strict rules. That everything had its place. Predator, prey. Strong, weak. He exhaled slowly. But then I started paying attention. And I realized something. She frowned. What? Nature isn't just about strength, he said. It's about connection. Riven felt something tighten in her chest. You think the Umberfang follows me because I overpowered it? He shook his head. No. It follows me because I see it for what it is. Not as a tool. Not as a weapon. But as something that deserves respect. She didn't know why his words unsettled her so much. Perhaps because she had spent her entire life believing strength was the only path. That power was the only thing that mattered. Yet, here was a man who defied that belief simply by existing. The Umberfang let out a low rumble, its amber eyes shifting to Riven. She stiffened as the beast slowly stood, its massive form moving with deadly grace. Eris remained relaxed as the creature approached her, watching with quiet amusement. Riven did not move as the Umberfang stopped mere inches away, its breath warm against her skin. She met its gaze, unflinching. And then, to her utter disbelief, the creature let out a soft chuff. Eris grinned. It likes you. She glared at him. I am not sure that is a good thing. He laughed, standing. You don't have to be afraid, you know? I am not afraid. The words left her before she could stop them. He took a step closer, his expression thoughtful. Then what are you? Riven hated the way her pulse quickened. She hated the way his presence unsettled her, not as an enemy, not as a threat, but as something else entirely. Something dangerous. Frustrated, she admitted stiffly. Eris chuckled. That, I believe. The moment stretched between them, something unspoken lingering in the air. The tension was different now, heavier, charged with something she did not yet want to name. She turned sharply. Come. We have more work to do. Eris watched her for a long moment before following. He said nothing, but the smirk on his lips told her he knew exactly what she was running from. And worse, so did she.